Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. Another woman is accusing former Vice President Joe Biden of inappropriate behavior. The Hartford Courant reports Amy Lapos, a former aide to Connecticut Congressman Jim Himes, claims Biden grabbed her by the head at a fundraiser in 2009. In a statement to CBS News, Lapos said, quote, "Men who invade a woman's personal space, touch women inappropriately, sexually harass women, and feed rape culture have no place in a position of power." Referring to this type of behavior as simply affection or grandpa-like or friendly is ridiculously dismissive and part of the problem. Saying, but Trump is dangerous and sets the bar for Democratic men far below where it should be. This latest allegation involving the vice president comes as Democrat and former Nevada Assemblywoman Lucy Flores says Biden kissed her in the back of her head before a campaign rally in 2014. In both instances, a spokesperson for Biden offered the following statement, which says in part, quote, "And not once, never did I believe I acted inappropriately. If it is suggested I did so, I will listen respectfully. But it was never my intention. I may not recall these moments the same way, and I may be surprised at what I hear. But we have arrived at an important time when women feel they can and should relate their experiences, and men should pay attention, and I will." Earlier, my colleague Tanya Rivero spoke with Flores and asked her about Biden's response.
Are either of the statements you've seen from the former vice president since Friday enough for you?
I don't believe so, because first and foremost, I really need him to acknowledge that that behavior was inappropriate. In any context or any situation with that context, that behavior is just inappropriate, period. And he doesn't go as far as acknowledging that. Second, I think that, in terms of when he talks about his motivation, et cetera, we really need to also acknowledge that it's not about the intent. It is about the person on the receiving end of that behavior, that unwanted behavior, and the way in which it makes that person feel, especially in a situation where you have that kind of a power imbalance going on.
Flores has previously said that Biden should not run, but says she would support him if he were to become the eventual Democratic nominee.
So in the context of his entire history, yes, he's not someone I would support in the primary.
Right.
Now that's going to be a decision that everybody else is going to have to make in terms of whether or not, given the totality of everything that he has done, if they believe that it's someone they want to support in the Democratic primary if he gets in.
Let me ask you something. If he were to be the Democratic nominee and he's up against Donald Trump, whose own history with women is, as we know, pretty clouded, who would you support in that kind of a matchup?
That's not even a question. Of course I would support Biden.
Let's bring in Caitlin Huey-Burns, Ed O'Keefe, and Laura Barrón-López. Caitlin is a CBSN political reporter. Ed is a CBS News political correspondent. He's in Washington. And Laura is a national political reporter for Politico. She's on Capitol Hill. Welcome to you all. Ed, let me start with you. What is the latest that you're hearing from Joe Biden's team?
Well, they essentially referred the Hartford Courant back to that statement that you read earlier, Elaine, in regards to this second accusation of what one woman describes as inappropriate behavior back in 2009. Earlier in the day, Biden's operation, as skeletal as it is, because remember, he's not yet actually a presidential candidate, began sort of pushing back against the chatter that some of these instances that have been well documented in photos or in video are inappropriate. They cited an essay posted last night by Stephanie Carter, who's the wife of the former Defense Secretary Ash Carter. Back in February 2017, Biden was seen putting his hands on her shoulders and whispering into her ear from behind. A lot of people thought that was a little creepy. She says no, it wasn't anything at all like that. It was a longtime friend of hers saying to her, "Thank you for letting your husband do this on behalf of the country." Similarly, there was a photo taken several years ago when Christopher Coons was sworn in as a senator. His young daughter was in attendance at the ceremonial swearing in the old Senate chamber. And there again, you see Vice President Biden lean over and whisper into the ear of a young girl. Some, especially on the internet, thought that was a little weird. Senator Coons telling the Washington Post, no, not weird at all. She, my daughter, has known the vice president her entire life, sees him as sort of a grandfatherly figure, and he was telling her, you should talk to my daughter about what it's like to have a dad in the U.S. Senate. That was underway, though, when that Hartford Courant article surfaced this afternoon with the next allegation. And now you just wonder, because how many times now in the last 2 years, Elaine, have we been down this road with business, media, and political figures where one person says one thing, others start to say they saw something similar, and we see how they react. Notably, up the street just a block from here is an ongoing forum with Democratic candidates, several of whom told us today it'll be up to Biden to decide what to do and voters to judge his character. But in that hall today are union activists, immigration activists, members of the liberal group Indivisible, and others from across the country. We asked a few of them, what do you make of this? And they were split. Some saying, par for the course, he's always behaved this way, not a disqualifying reason for him to avoid the race. Others saying, look, it's been long accepted that men behave this way. It shouldn't be accepted, and it's probably not going to be a factor in his candidacy, which is unfortunate. And then even one guy who we talked to said he hadn't heard about it. So you can see there, about 3 days since the accusation first surfaced, sort of a split opinion on how exactly this might factor into Biden's decision and his potential viability.
So it's really interesting to hear, Ed, that range of reactions. So, Laura, let me ask you, with Biden yet to formally announce the 2020 run, is there any indication as to how much this might actually impact his potential campaign?
Right. Well, it's really early. It's only been a few days since the first allegation came out by Lucy Flores, who is still saying that she isn't happy with the response from Biden. She still wants a full-fledged apology, which she doesn't think he did in that initial statement. And so it's going to be hard to tell how much this impacts him and his potential candidacy. Again, as Ed mentioned, he isn't even in the race yet. He still is leading in a number, if not all of the polls. And so also whether or not there's going to be reaction on Capitol Hill, we haven't yet heard from a number of lawmakers. But Biden is very well liked amongst lawmakers here on the Hill, and many of them are expecting to endorse him if he does run.
Yeah, and Caitlin, let me turn back to the comments that Lucy Flores made about supporting Biden if, in fact, he were to become the Democratic nominee. Is there a sense that if it should come to it, if it should come down to it, are these allegations something that Democratic voters might overlook?
Well, she did say that if it were a choice between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, she would clearly choose Joe Biden. But we are in a Democratic primary now, and these voters have choices. And that's what had already been a deterrent to Joe Biden getting into the race early on. He has been lingering. He has been waiting to make this decision, even though he has pretty much everything in line ready to go if he does in fact choose to do this. This question of has he moved on? Has the party moved on from him? Is there room in this party, in this primary of new faces, the diverse group, one of the most diverse groups that this Democratic primary field has seen in quite some time? And so Democrats have choices, and they're kind of saying, and we've been reporting this before, that they really love Joe Biden, but a lot of people don't want him to run because of the scrutiny that's going to be applied to him personally, the scrutiny that's going to be applied to his record. Remember, earlier in the week, last week, he had to apologize and turn around from the Anita Hill hearings. He was the Judiciary Committee chairman at the time, and he said he wished he could have done more. So he's facing this kind of reckoning within his own party on a variety of different issues, but the party has changed so much in this era of Me Too that there is this kind of zero tolerance policy that Democrats themselves have established, going back to Al Franken and some others, trying to claim the moral high ground and leaving little gray area here. So this is what they're trying to navigate through in the primary.
So, Ed, you asked presidential candidate and Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar about the allegations against Biden. I want to play some of what she had to say.
On the accusations facing the former Vice President Joe Biden, what's your take on that?
He has addressed it, and I'm sure he'll continue to address it if he decides to get in the race.
If there are similar allegations made by other people, does that merit him perhaps thinking twice about getting in at all?
I think that's up to him. I personally, he came to my state several times helping me, and I have campaigned with him, and I never personally experienced or saw anything like this. But again, he's going to have to deal with it, and I'm sure he will.
So, Ed, what is the sense that you are getting from 2020 hopefuls about how they plan to address these allegations against Joe Biden?
We've seen, Elaine, now in the last 48 hours or so, at least 4 of the contenders sort of address this by saying, first of all, they believe Lucy Flores, they stand by her decision to speak out about it, but that ultimately it will be up to the vice president and to voters to decide whether or not it's a disqualifying factor or a reason for him not to run. The next question I asked Klobuchar was, are you sort of sick and tired of being asked questions about Joe Biden? Because whether it's about this or just about his general intentions, she and others do get asked. And she said, yeah, it is kind of annoying because, we're running our own races. But there's no denying that he sits atop the polls and is a factor, at least an X factor for now, unless or until he gets into the race. So, this could become yet another marker for these contenders to sort of weigh in. But remember, they've all gotten in trouble, kind of, in the last few weeks for perhaps rushing to judgment, whether it was Cory Booker and Kamala Harris in the case of Jussie Smollett there in Chicago, or all of the contenders essentially throwing the governor of Virginia and other state officials under the bus for their recent scandals. So there may now, especially given the deference that Biden is afforded as a top party leader, be a moment where these candidates sort of wait and see and try to avoid it or don't say much, because they realize this could go all sorts of ways. It could either blow over, given the goodwill for him in the party, or if it piles up, it could lead to him ultimately deciding not to run.
I mean, Caitlin, we are in the Me Too era right now. You do have a record number of women running on the Democratic side here. How does that heighten the issue, not just for Joe Biden, but even more broadly here, to some of what Ed was talking about? There has been in the past on other issues sort of a rush to judgment. How do you think is an issue? How difficult might this be, or complicated might it be for some candidates to navigate?
You're right. And Lucy Flores in this interview today and in others has said that she wants to at least have this conversation in the context of a Democratic primary and against the backdrop of so many changes that have occurred within the party and outside of it, really just a cultural kind of movement that we've seen across the board. So that conversation is certainly being had. And as you can tell from Ed's reporting on the candidates and looking at comments from various Democrats across the field, they're not quite sure how to handle this kind of thing. There are kind of, and you did see this a little bit after the fallout with Virginia, that now Democrats are kind of facing these issues within their own party. It was much easier to kind of point to the other side when those issues were coming out, point to the current president, but now they're facing these issues. And there is this big question about, is there any gray area? Should all of these things be judged on a certain scale? And that's what they're kind of coming to terms with. I think if Joe Biden were, if there weren't as many people in the race, if there weren't as many women or 2 African Americans or others that gave Democratic primary voters a chance to look elsewhere, it might be a different story.
Yeah, I mean, Laura, what is your thought on that? How has the diversity in the Democratic primary so far sort of affected the way in which these issues are now being discussed among various Democrats?
Well, look, I mean, voters now have so many choices compared to the most recent cycles. And so they're weighing their options. They're debating whether or not they want an older candidate, whether or not they want a white male, because of the fact that they have a number of women running, a number of African Americans and 1 Latino. And so they are trying to figure out, who policy-wise they best match with, but also if they want to push the party forward in a way by choosing a candidate that they think is more diverse.
Ed, let me turn to another issue here. There is some controversy between progressive Democrats and the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. What is causing that friction, Ed, and how are both sides responding?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. Laura's probably best equipped to talk about this, and she covers congressional races. But basically, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee told Democratic political consultants across the country last week, you either work for incumbents or you don't work for us at all. In other words, if you get approached by somebody who wants to challenge a sitting House Democratic incumbent in a primary, don't take that job because you won't get any work from us across the rest of the country. Big threat that really hadn't been made before by the central campaign arm for House Democrats, but it's designed to protect incumbents and basically say to the party, we don't want any more of these high-profile primary fights between incumbents and challengers that we saw during the 2018 campaign. The irony is that several of the highest-profile freshman Democratic members are women who challenged sitting incumbents and won their seats. So, in essence, the party is saying we want to protect them because they are incumbents, but we also don't want to see any more of them show up. And you can imagine that that has certainly insulted and infuriated a lot of the more progressive members who know that across the country there are liberals who are looking to challenge long-sitting incumbents in races. And so we'll see, I think, in the coming days whether that policy or that announcement changes at all. Part of the reason it's gotten so much attention is because guess who drew attention to it? None other than the most high-profile freshman member of Congress, but Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who said, not a good idea. How about instead of directing your money to the DCCC, you just direct money to candidates themselves and try to cut out the middleman?
Well, Laura, you reported late last week on a meeting between DCCC Chair Cheri Bustos and members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. What is the latest that you're hearing following that meeting?
Right. So that meeting ended on not the best note. Congressman Ro Khanna of California came out quite infuriated and said that that progressives need to not, give money to the D-TRIP. He was starting to float that as an idea, as a way to try to get D-TRIP to reverse course. He said that progressives are going to fight this aggressively. And then we saw over the weekend, as Ed mentioned, Ocasio-Cortez tweet out asking supporters and donors to directly contribute to frontline Democrats rather than giving to the D-TRIP because of this policy. And I can tell you about those tweets that she actually was able to raise $30,000 per candidate for the tweets that she sent out yesterday. And that's a significant amount of money right ahead of their first major deadline, where they're trying to show strong fundraising numbers in order to beat back potential Republican opponents. And so right now we're just waiting to see what more steps progressives may take, whether or not they're going to threaten to not pay their dues to the D-TRIP in order to try to get a reversal. So far, we know that D-TRIP Chair Cheri Bustos is not moving, and she has the support of Speaker Nancy Pelosi and the other two deputy leaders. And so right now there's no indication that she is going to reverse course. But if progressives keep up pressure, they may be able to reach a compromise.
Pretty remarkable to see this playing out in such a public way. All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns, Ed O'Keefe, and Laura Barrón-López, thanks to you all. Appreciate it.